The Galactic Council's chamber erupted into chaos as the human detective's chilling confession stunned the horrified alien delegates. Enraged shouts and frantic whispers filled the vast space, echoing off the ornate walls and filling the air with panic and uncertainty. The room pulsed with tension so thick it could be cut with a plasma blade, as the grizzled human stood impassively at the podium, unfazed by the bedlam his words had unleashed. Greg Bailey, scarred and battle-hardened, had been summoned to account for the destruction of an Iridian warship by human forces. The loss of the alien vessel had sent shockwaves through the galactic community, threatening to shatter the fragile peace that existed between the 100 races represented in the Council. The Iridians, in particular, were outraged by what they saw as an unprovoked attack on their ship, and they demanded answers from the human delegation. The Council speaker, an Iridian named Yaksa, called the session to order, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain for the human standing before him. Yaksa demanded an explanation for the attack, insisting that the Iridian ship had been conducting a routine customs inspection when it was destroyed by the humans. But Greg had come prepared. He activated a holoprojector, which displayed footage of the Iridian warship firing on a human civilian transport. The transport's distress calls filled the chamber, the panicked voices of the crew pleading for help as their ship was torn apart by the Iridian weapons. Greg's voice was hard as he explained that a nearby human patrol ship had responded to the distress calls, defending the civilians from the Iridian aggression. Yaksa sputtered with rage, insisting that the Iridians had the right to conduct their affairs as they saw fit in their own space. The human detective's response was cold and unyielding. So can we. As the council chamber erupted in shouting once again, Greg and Yaksa glared at each other, the enmity between their races plain for all to see. The stakes could not have been higher. If the council sided with the Iridians, it could mean war between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The fate of billions hung in the balance as Greg prepared to make his case, knowing that failure was not an option. The council speaker tried to shout over the clamor, calling for order. Greg ignored him, slamming his fist on the podium. "I'm not finished. I have a confession to make on behalf of all humanity." The cacophony died out, hundreds of eyes fixed on the lone human. Greg tapped on his datapad, and a hologram sprang to life behind him. It showed Iridian freighters jettisoning canisters onto the surface of a verdant world. This was taken last month on the colony of New Eden. Those canisters contained radioactive waste, which poisoned the soil and water supply. Thousands of humans were sickened, and the colony had to be evacuated. Yaksa scoffed. "Absurd, you have no proof those ships were Iridian." Greg glared at him. "Don't I?" He zoomed in on one of the ships, revealing Iridian script on its hull. "But that's not all. We've captured dozens of Iridian agents on our colonies, caught in the act of sabotaging our terraforming equipment, and just last week we stopped Iridian hackers from breaching our defense mainframe." He cycled through more images and videos, each one damning. Iridians in the process of vandalism, Iridian computer code in human systems, Iridian weapons found in human space. With every piece of evidence, Yaksa's objections grew more desperate, his denials more hollow. "Fabrications," the Iridian shouted. "Lies and slander." The human ignored him. "I have one more piece of evidence to present." Greg's finger hovered over the datapad. "This is a recording we intercepted from an Iridian military channel." He pressed play. The holograms flickered, replaced by two Iridian figures, a general and an admiral based on their uniforms. "The humans are growing too powerful," the general was saying. "We must act now while we still have the advantage." The admiral nodded. "I agree, but an outright attack would be too obvious. We must be subtle." "What do you suggest?" "We stage a series of false flag operations, bomb our own civilians but plant evidence that points to the humans. Then we go to the council, demand that they be punished for their crimes. Economic sanctions, trade embargoes, stripped of their military." "Exactly. We'll bleed them dry and they'll be too weak to resist when we finally invade." The recording ended. For a moment the chamber was silent. Then it exploded into pandemonium, 100 voices shouting at once. Some called for the Iridians to be punished, others demanded further proof. A few accused Greg of forgery, of manufacturing the evidence. Through it all, Yaksa sat in his chair, seething with barely contained fury. His eyes bored into Greg's, promising retribution. Then, with a howl of rage, the Iridian leapt from his seat, lunging at the human. Yaksa's guards grabbed him, holding him back. The Iridian thrashed in their grip, spittle flying from his lips as he screamed at Greg. The human didn't flinch, meeting Yaksa's hate-filled gaze with unwavering resolve. When he spoke, his voice was cold and hard as steel. "Did you really think you could corner humanity with no consequences?" As the council chamber fell into utter pandemonium, the blaring of warning klaxons pierced the air, their crimson lights pulsing in time with the accelerating heartbeats of those present. All eyes turned to the main view screen, where an armada of Iridian warships emerged from the swirling vortex of hyperspace, their sleek hulls glinting menacingly against the backdrop of Earth's serene blue. Yaksa's face twisted into a triumphant sneer as he pointed an accusing finger at Greg. "Your insolence has sealed your world's fate, human. Earth will pay the price for your arrogance." Greg's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening into a mask of grim determination. He reached for his communicator, desperate to warn Earth's defenses, but the device only crackled with static. The Iridian fleet had jammed all transmissions. Left with no other choice, Greg sprinted from the council chamber, his boots pounding against the polished floor as he raced towards the shuttle bay. He leapt into the nearest council shuttle, his fingers flying across the controls as he fired up the engines and punched in the coordinates for Earth. The small craft shuddered as it tore through the void, its engines straining as Greg pushed them to their limits. Stars streaked past the viewports in blurs of light, the shuttle's frame groaning under the immense forces at play. As Earth loomed into view, Greg's heart sank. The planet hung suspended in space, surrounded by a bristling ring of Iridian warships. Their weapons were primed and locked onto the world's major cities, poised to reduce them to smoldering ruins at a moment's notice. The shuttle's comm system crackled to life, and the sneering visage of the Iridian commander filled the screen. "Human vessel, this is your only warning. Surrender now, or watch your world burn." Greg's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with defiance. His hand hovered over the shuttle's control panel, fingers brushing against a small, innocuous button. With a final, resolute breath, he pressed it. Instantly, a massive electromagnetic pulse erupted from a network of hidden human satellites, engulfing the Iridian fleet in a cascading wave of energy. The alien ships shuddered and went dark, their systems fried by the overwhelming surge. They hung in space, dead in the void, as Earth's defense fleet surged forward to secure the crippled vessels and take their crews into custody. Greg opened a channel to the council chamber, where Yaksa watched the scene unfold in impotent fury. The human's voice was cold as the depths of space as he addressed the seething Iridian. "Your prisoners will be treated in accordance with interstellar law, Counselor, but mark my words, any further aggression will be met with the full might of humanity. Do not test us again." Yaksa's face contorted with pure, unbridled hatred. He opened his mouth to retort, but Greg severed the connection with a sharp jab of his finger. As the human ships corralled the last of the Iridian vessels, Greg sagged back in his seat, the weight of the narrowly averted catastrophe crashing down on him. Earth was safe for now, but he knew that this was far from over. The Iridians would not take this humiliation lightly. There would be a reckoning, and when it came, humanity would need to be ready to fight for its very survival. As Greg's shuttle landed on Earth, he was greeted by a sea of cheering faces. The people chanted his name, hailing him as a hero who had single-handedly saved the planet from Iridian aggression. Reporters clamored for interviews, and dignitaries jostled to shake his hand. Greg accepted their praise with a tight smile, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. He wasted no time returning to the Galactic Council, the weight of humanity's fate heavy on his shoulders. As he strode into the council chamber, The cacophony of angry voices assaulted his ears. Delegates from 100 races shouted and gesticulated wildly, their fear and mistrust of humanity's advanced weaponry palpable in the air. Yaksa, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer, stood at the center of the maelstrom. "Honored delegates," he called out, his voice cutting through the din, "the humans have shown their true colors. Their advanced weapons pose a threat to us all. I move that they be stripped of their council seat and isolated for the safety of the galaxy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, and Greg watched in growing alarm as more and more delegates nodded their assent. It quickly became clear that Yaksa had been busy in humanity's absence, making deals and forging alliances to turn the council against them. As the votes began to be tallied, Greg knew he had to act fast. He strode to the center of the chamber, his boots ringing against the polished floor. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice calm and clear, "before you cast your final votes, there is something you should know." The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed on the human. Greg activated his holoprojector, and a map of council space sprang to life above their heads. Scattered across the map were hundreds of small, blinking dots. "These," Greg said, pointing to the dots, "are stealth probes, placed by humanity in the territories of every major race represented here. Each probe is equipped with a miniaturized version of the weapon that disabled the Iridian fleet." He tapped a command into his wrist computer, and the dots began to pulsate ominously. With a single command, "I could disable the defense fleets of every race in this room, leaving your homeworlds vulnerable to attack or invasion." The silence in the chamber was deafening, broken only by the ragged breathing of the horrified delegates. Greg let his words sink in for a moment before continuing. "But I won't do that, because this is not a threat but a promise. Humanity will not be cowed or controlled by this council. We will continue to defend our interests and our allies, and any further attempts to undermine or attack us will be met with overwhelming force." Ayaksa, his face pale and slick with sweat, leapt to his feet. "You expect us to trust you, after you've admitted to planting weapons in our space?" Greg fixed the Iridian with a cool stare. "You can't trust us. But consider this. If we were the monsters you claim us to be, we would have used this technology already. We seek peace, but we will not hesitate to defend ourselves." He swept his gaze across the room, making eye contact with each delegate in turn. "The choice is yours. Continue down this path of fear and aggression, and we will all suffer the consequences, or work with us to build a future of cooperation and mutual respect." The chamber erupted into a frenzy of heated debate, delegates shouting to be heard over the din. Greg stood at the center of it all, his face an unreadable mask as he watched the council descend into chaos. In the tense days that followed Greg's dramatic revelation to the Galactic Council, an uneasy quiet settled over the galaxy. The council races, now acutely aware of humanity's advanced technological capabilities, gave human-controlled space a wide berth, carefully avoiding any actions that might be perceived as provocative or hostile. But Greg knew better than to let his guard down. He was certain that Yaksa and the Iridians would not allow this humiliation to stand unchallenged. They would seek revenge, one way or another. His fears were soon confirmed when a series of devastating terrorist attacks rocked several human colony worlds. The death toll was staggering, with thousands of innocent civilians killed in the blasts. As human intelligence agencies sifted through the wreckage, a disturbing pattern emerged. The explosives used in the attacks were of advanced Iridian design, far beyond anything the terrorists should have had access to. Greg wasted no time in confronting Yaksa in the council chamber. He strode into the grand hall, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "Councillor Yaksa," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, "I demand an explanation for these attacks on human colonies. The evidence points directly to Iridian involvement." Yaksa, seated at the center of the Iridian delegation, merely smiled, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Detective Bailey. The Iridian Empire has no involvement in these unfortunate incidents." Greg slammed his fist on the podium, the sharp crack resounding through the chamber. "Enough of your lies, Yaksa. We have proof that Iridian weapons were used in these attacks. You will cease this covert war against humanity, or face the consequences." Yaksa leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Threats, Detective. How uncivilized. The Iridian Empire is a peaceful nation. We have no quarrel with humanity." Greg's patience snapped. He had had enough of the Iridians' deceit and manipulation. It was time to take a stand. He tapped a command into his wrist computer, and every view screen in the chamber flickered to life. Greg's face appeared, broadcast live to every corner of the galaxy. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "For too long humanity has been a victim of the Galactic Council's machinations. We have been attacked, undermined, and now terrorized by those who claim to be our allies." He paused, letting his words sink in. "No more. As of this moment, I am activating humanity's network of stealth probes. These probes, equipped with advanced EMP technology, are now disabling the defense fleets of every Council race." On cue, alarms began to sound throughout the chamber as the Council delegates received word of their fleets going dark. Panic and confusion swept through the room. Greg's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Let this serve as a warning. Humanity will no longer be a pawn in the Council's games. We will forge our own path, defending our allies and our interests as we see fit. Any attempt to interfere in human affairs will be met with swift and decisive action." With that, he cut the transmission, leaving the Council chamber in stunned silence. Ignoring the uproar that followed, Greg turned on his heel and marched out, his head held high. In the years that followed, humanity emerged as a dominant power in the galaxy. Free from the Council's influence, they formed new alliances with other independent races, creating a bloc that rivaled the Council in strength and influence. The Iridians, humiliated by Greg's actions, retreated into isolation, their once mighty empire reduced to a shadow of its former self. But in the dark corners of the galaxy, Yaksa plotted his revenge, his hatred for humanity burning hotter than ever. Greg, now a respected leader on Earth, knew that the struggle was far from over. As he gazed out at the stars from his office window, he steeled himself for the challenges to come. Humanity had carved out its place in the cosmos, but holding on to it would require constant vigilance and unyielding determination. The galaxy stood on the brink of a new era, with humanity at the center of the storm. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The human race would never again submit to the whims of others. They would fight for their place among the stars, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.